What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron. Today we're going to go over my top 10 running back rankings for your Dynasty rookie drafts that are taking place this month with a little bit of a twist. It's going to be my top 10, and then I'm also going to separate them by tier so you guys can kind of see the clear drop-offs at the position that I'm seeing personally. Now, we did a video like this last night on the wide receivers. If you haven't seen that already, go check it out. You guys absolutely went crazy on that. Blew it up for like 3,000 views in 24 hours, which is pretty crazy. And that ended up being kind of a behemoth. I think it ended up being like 50 minutes long. So I don't want to make this intro too long. We're going to get into these players, do a deep dive on my top 10 running backs. Without further ado, if you want the full rankings, I have my full running back rankings, wide receiver, quarterback, running back, my top 50 rookie rankings to dominate your rookie drafts coming up here, all on Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. If you enjoy the video, make sure you're down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm pretty cool. My nitty bag.
All right, let's get me in the top right corner of the tier list. And at number one, running back one overall in S tier by himself, Breece Hall. And this is going to be pretty much chalk. I think everybody has Breece Hall here, rightfully so. And I will say, just a side note, very excited as a Jets fan to just have like a top fantasy asset. I mean, we have the RB1 in this class, the wide receiver 3 at worst in this class. And if we zoom out to like Dynasty ADP, the Jets have a like top 20 quarterback in Dynasty ADP, like top 6 running back in Dynasty ADP, 2 top 24 wide receivers at worst in Dynasty ADP. We're on the up and up here. We're building something here in New York, fellas. This is not the same old Jets, is what I've been saying here. Now, when we talk about Breece Hall and what this means for fantasy, he goes 36 overall to the Jets, second round. The Jets actually traded up. They traded up in front of the Texans, I believe, to make sure that they secured Breece Hall, which tells me they really want the guy. And I've been seeing a lot of takes on Twitter, just circling around with the idea that I've seen takes on Twitter that like they don't like Breece Hall's landing spot because Michael Carter's there, and I've seen like, oh well, Michael Carter's already there. I'm really not in love with this landing spot, fellas. I mean, when we're talking about wide open depth charts in the NFL, there's not many of them. Coming into the draft, it was probably like the Falcons, the Texans, two teams who are kind of dumpster fires but don't have any running backs. Outside of that, there really isn't a wide open running back room in the NFL. There is no such thing as a wide open running back room. Every running back room is some form of a committee. You're always going to have a role player there, whether that's like a Kenyon Drake or a Nyheim Hines or a Tariq Cohen or, a J.D. McKissick in Washington. There's always going to be numerous running backs part of that committee. There's not going to be a clear runway for a running back to take off like I guess the Steelers had it last year with Najee Harris, but that's really it. So Breece Hall landing here, I think is fine. I think the Jets were one of the better landing spots. If you put a gun to my head and said, 5 best landing spots for Breece Hall pre-draft, I would have named the Jets as one of them. I probably would have said like Jets, Falcons, Texans. I don't know. I'm kind of blanking right now because you're putting me on the spot here, but you get what I'm saying. Now, when we talk about this landing spot, Breece Hall going there, the biggest roadblock is Michael Carter. I don't really see that as a roadblock. I know that some people do see that as a roadblock. Personally, I see this very similar to Jonathan Taylor coming to the Colts, and then they already have Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines. Eventually, talent went out. Jonathan Taylor became that top dog, and that's really all there is to be said. Now, it is worth noting that in Jonathan Taylor's rookie year, he had a very rough start. Not a very rough start, but he was the RB19 in points per game through 10 weeks. And then, as we all know, went on an absolute tear down the stretch. Final 7 games was the RB3 on like the final 6 or 7 games. Went absolutely crazy. So it wouldn't shock me if it was somewhat similar where the Jets kind of ease in Breece Hall and sort of defer to Michael Carter, maybe give Breece Hall the majority of the rushing work and give Michael Carter a majority of the receiving work and maybe, 40% of the rushes somewhere in there. Like, I'm not saying that Breece Hall is going to come out here right on the runway and be a top 10 running back in fantasy, but when we're talking about a rookie running back, that's not really the expectation, or should that really be the expectation? Now, I think it will be very similar to what we saw with Jonathan Taylor, where midway through the season, Breece Hall, if he's good, right? Remember, when we pick these players in our rookie drafts, we're betting on these players to be good, to be talented at their position. If he is talented, if he is as good as advertised, he will beat out Michael Carter, a day 3 running back who really wasn't that great last year. Past that, I think it's wheels up. I think by midseason, he takes the job over completely. And then also, this is Dynasty. So when we zoom out and we talk about Breece Hall, who really only has a wide open depth chart when we talk about like Ty Johnson, Tevin Coleman behind Michael Carter, and then a day 3 running back that this team isn't super invested into for the long term. Long term, this is wheels up. Breece Hall is going to be that RB1 for this team for pretty much the entirety of his rookie contract, unless if he's just straight up not good at football or like some freak injury happens. Now, I even like, I think Jonathan Taylor is a good comp for him. I also think that Nick Chubb is a good comp for him, where Nick Chubb came in there, showed flashes. Carlos Hyde was like the RB1. I don't think that Michael Carter is going to be the 1A. I think that he'll be the 1B and then eventually just be the B, where Nick Chubb came in there, showed by like midseason he was that guy, and just, took control of that backfield, and then from there, he has been the guy in Cleveland. Now, when we look at Breece Hall, I've only talked about his landing spot so far. He's a very clean prospect when we talk about his profile. He is an elite running back prospect. He's the only elite running back prospect in this draft class. Elite running backs hit top 12 seasons, so RB1 seasons 80% of the time. It's a really, really good cohort to be a part of. He has an elite profile. When we look at it across the board, his production was good, his film grade was good, A+ athleticism, decent receiving, and he is a 21-year-old early declare at running back. His comps are Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, Matt Forte. That's what my system, the RS grade, spit out for him. That's a very strong group, man. I think that I do think that those are all very fair comps. I think that Jonathan Taylor is like the super high end, but I think that he is a Joe Mixon, Matt Forte. I think that makes sense for Breece Hall. So you can get that at the 101 in a draft. I think that is a fine 101 spent. Now, this is where we get a little bit more into the weeds here, and we're going to talk about Kenneth Walker as our RB2 in A tier. And I know that some people have him as like their RB1. For fantasy purposes, I can't get there. Now, first of all, he goes to the Seahawks, 41st overall in the second round. And if you want to talk about competition, I think in my eyes, I think a lot of people that are on the Michael Carter is like some huge roadblock for Breece Hall train they're kind of neglecting the fact that like Rashad Penny looked really good last year. I don't know, my nose is like running. I have allergies here, but playing through the pain. Let me pull this up real quick though. This is a great tweet from Jacob Rickroad, and it just shows how great Rashad Penny was last year. He started 5 games at the end of 2021. He put up 692 yards, 138 yards per game, 6 touchdowns. He looked really, really good. I believe the Seahawks also extended him 1 year. So he's not there for the long term, but I think right away, Kenneth Walker has a little bit more of a roadblock to immediate production than Breece Hall. Rashad Penny, a former first-round pick, looked great last year. I feel like them taking Kenneth Walker tells us a little bit more about how they feel about Chris Carson, a guy who has some kind of like spinal injury where at this point I'd kind of be like, I would, if you ask me if is he going to play another game in the NFL or not, I would probably lean no. But it's close. It's close, man. Now, I think that they bring him in because, Chris Carson's getting old. He has that injury going on. Now, I will say, regardless, I just wanted to sort of make it clear that I do believe that Kenneth Walker's landing spot's worse than Breece Hall's, and I don't think that is really a wild claim. Now, I will say, anyways, I talked about this last week. Landing spot for me, regardless, isn't really a huge input for me, even with running backs. I know a lot of people make the claim that running backs matter because, like, the depth chart, the immediate depth chart makes sense. They're more of a short shelf life asset, so you care a little bit more about that. A running back in year one, I'm not ultra concerned unless if you come into a spot where, like, let's say Kenneth Walker went to like the Vikings, had to sit behind Dalvin Cook, or something like that, where it's like a Derrick Henry situation where he goes to the Titans and sits behind DeMarco Murray. There's not a clear like stud on that team. I really don't care a ton. So he goes to the Seahawks, who do like to run the ball quite a bit. It's a fine situation, is what I'd say. I'd give it like a B minus B. It's not a huge negative, but I kind of just wanted to get that out of the way for all the people that, because I think that most of the Michael Carter, not even enthusiasts, but just guys who think that Michael Carter takes away from Breece Hall are also neglecting Rashad Penny with Kenneth Walker. Now, when we talk about Kenneth Walker, the prospect, he comes out as a gold in my database. And the reason why I have him as RB2 and not in the same tier as Breece Hall, in fantasy, we're all playing in PPR leagues. Kenneth Walker, his receiving production in college was really bad. And I know that a lot of people think, I've seen a lot of takes on Twitter of like, I'm trying to think of somebody on top of my head that had like a bad receiving market share in college and then came into the NFL and was like a mega producer in terms of catching the ball. We really haven't seen one of those, but people do think that, of course, you can overproduce. You can outproduce what you did in college, right? A lot of people point to, well, he looks natural catching the ball on film. He was used in Michigan State's system where, even though that Michigan State has a system where, even if they did have a system where they didn't pass the ball a ton to their running backs, we were talking about a guy who accounted for 1.44% of the receiving yards at Michigan State, or just over his entire career. During his 3-year career, he only accounted for 1.44% of his college team's receiving yards. That is awful. This is every running back here that is silver or better, and I have it filtered by least career average receiving yard market share. He is second lowest in the entire database, behind Chris Wells, above Deontay Foreman. It's really not pretty. Now, I know a lot of you guys that are Kenneth Walker enthusiasts are going to have kind of, that tunnel vision. You're going to zoom in on Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson. I would just stop you there, because if Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson can succeed, why can't Kenneth Walker? I'm not saying that Kenneth Walker can't succeed, but then that means you are betting on him becoming a generational pure rusher, right? Adrian Peterson, Derrick Henry are some of the greatest pure rushers of our generation. I believe they both have 2,000-yard rushing seasons, but I'm not sure if Adrian Peterson does. I believe they do, but I could be wrong. It's really rough that for Kenneth Walker to hit, right? For Kenneth Walker to hit, he needs to be an otherworldly, or not otherworldly, I think it's a little bit over the top, but an elite talent in the NFL, like a Nick Chubb, a Derrick Henry, a guy who is one of the best pure rushers in the league, not even one of the best in that top tier pure rushers in the NFL that affects their team in the win-loss column. And that's really tough, because when you're betting on Kenneth Walker, for him to hit and for him to pay off, and for him to be even a Nick Chubb, who I think he's never even had like a top 5 running back season. I think he's just had like a couple top 12 finishes. You need a 99th percentile outcome. Where with like Breece Hall, I think that like a median projection for him would be like a Joe Mixon, who hasn't done anything crazy, but he's held on to value. He's given you, I believe that he had a top 5 finish last year, but I could be wrong. It just feels like Breece Hall, in terms of just his like his 0th percentile, or no, his like 50th percentile outcome, his median projection looks a lot better than Kenneth Walker. Where I think that Kenneth Walker's median projection, instead of like a Joe Mixon or a Matt Forte, you're kind of looking at a Ronald Jones, a Damian Harris, a Jordan Howard. I think those are much more fair comps, right? When we look at, again, Derrick Henry, Adrian Peterson, both of those guys, elite prospects, where Derrick Henry was a freak, just like 6'4", 230, or maybe he's like 245, just an absolute freak, runs fast, all that. Adrian Peterson, 7th overall, one of the best college prospects we've ever seen. Kenneth Walker doesn't fit in that category to me. That's why I think in terms of his median projection, we're looking at, Ronald Jones, Damian Harris, Jordan Howard, between the tackles, grinders in the NFL, not a super coveted asset. Now, I still have him as I think around my 105, my RB2, because he is a 21-year-old running back. The top 24 running backs right now are super weak until that 2023 class comes in and pretty much replenishes everything like we saw with the 2017 draft class. We're stuck with what we got for now, and any 21-year-old running back is going to have value in Dynasty. It's really not hard to see where Kenneth Walker gets maybe 700 yards his rookie year and is valued similarly to a J.K. Dobbins or Cam Akers heading into year 2 as a top 8 to 12 running back in Dynasty. That's completely in his range of outcomes. So from a market perspective and trying to gain value in terms of Dynasty, I think he's absolutely fine in that area. But I think we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, putting him as RB1, as a generational talent. He's not that. He even hit my yards created multiplier. He had a great yards created, 92nd percentile. In my running back model, I have a threshold where if you hit a certain number of yards created per attempt, which he did, you get a multiplier on your profile. He went from a silver to a gold, meaning that his profile before the yards created multiplier was pretty weak. Now, I don't know if I've made it clear, but a gold running back in my database hits top 12 seasons at a 50% rate, whereas elite hit 80%. So it's a clear, tier down from a Breece Hall. That's why I have him at the A spot. Again, I think from a value perspective of him being just a 21-year-old running back that doesn't have to do a ton to impress in year 1. We just had Travis Etienne have a redshirt year and still maintain top 12 running back dynasty value. Kenneth Walker, all he has to do is just put up probably 700 yards from scrimmage and show some flashes, and you'll probably hold top 12 running back value in Dynasty. So from that perspective, I think he's a fine bet. I took him earlier on today. I got him to fall to the 106 in an analyst league, which is pretty wild. I took him there. So I'm not completely risk adverse to him. I just don't see an argument for him at 101, which is fine, right? Breece Hall, consensus 101. But I have him in that tier with the big 3 wide receivers. I have him behind those big 3 wide receivers, but if you want to take him ahead of them, more power to you. I think that I have him in the same tier as those guys. So if you do want to do that, that's completely fine with me. Again, I just think that the RB1, 101 type arguments are a little bit flimsy in my eyes when we're playing in PPR leagues and we have a profile like Kenneth Walker's. Now, when we go to B tier, this is where the running back. Oh man, the running back class just falls off a cliff here, fellas. Like this is ugly. So B tier, we have James Cook, goes 63rd overall to the Bills. Again, really not a pretty running back group. Like James Cook being the RB3 in your running back class is just a really, really ugly outcome. Now, when we talk about James Cook, we'll go a little bit Slim Shady here. We'll talk about kind of his negatives first. And the first negative is that he's 5'11", 199 pounds, and that's not great size. Now, I saw a tweet that was, I don't know if I'm going to say that it was in like bad faith or anything, but it was a little bit misguided. It was pointing to, like, how can you say James Cook is going to be better in the NFL because he's too small? We have seen Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Chris Johnson, Shady McCoy, etc. All those guys who are around like 5'9 to 5'11 in that like 195 to 200 pound range be successful in the NFL. The problem is that this guy, David Wilson, is one of the, in my opinion, I think that he is one of the sharpest guys when it comes to running backs. He's very, very good at what he does. Throw him a follow. I want to say let me pause this real quick. Yeah, I wanted to find his Twitter real quick before I just kind of used his big chart like this. He has a crazy running back model. His @ is Wilson8Tor. So WILLSON 8TOR. David Wilson on Twitter. He is pretty much, I would say, like one of my go-to like running back sources, up there with like a Graham Barfield. In terms of like when it comes down to breaking numbers, he's very good at this. And one of the things that he's been driving home, with that part of the argument of like when Jonathan Taylor came out, they were like, oh, he has too much tread on his tires, he's going to get hurt in the NFL. He actually thinks that you need to have that touches in college, and just sustaining volume in college makes you more likely to become a workhorse in the NFL, which is a really good theory. And for the most part, it checks out. You have some outliers like an Antonio Gibson, like an Alvin Kamara, but for the most part, it does check out. Now, when you look at all of the guys listed in the tweet, you look at touches per game. That's what it's ordered by, right? So TCH, PG, touches per game. You have Austin Eckler, who had like 26 touches per game in college. Then you have McCoy, 25, all the way down to Elijah Mitchell, who had 13 touches per game. James Cook is half of that. He had 6.46 touches per game in college. I think it's a little bit misguided to say that James Cook will ever be like a bell cow running back, workhorse running back in the same vein as a Christian McCaffrey, or he'll never shoulder that workload, which is why I don't love James Cook. He comes out as a silver in the model. It's also why the model doesn't really love him. Silver, even though he's a round 2 running back, he only has a 25% hit rate of a top 12 season as a silver running back. But with this being a weak running back class, that's why he's at RB3. I just don't expect him to ever be that bell cow. Don't ever expect James Cook to ever, he's never going to be in an area of like 20 touches per game. But the important part about James Cook's game is that he is very efficient and he's very good in the passing game. Now, when we look at this chart here still, we can see the percentage of receptions that were a part of his touches. So of those 6.46 touches per game, 22.56% of them came on receptions, the highest of this entire list. So if you're going to cling to anything with James Cook, it's not that, he's small but can still shoulder a big workload. It's that he's small, but he does damage in the receiving game. He was a really fun receiving weapon at Georgia. He played out in the slot, out wide. I remember watching when he got picked in the NFL draft, they were showing like plays of him like literally lining up on the outside, playing receiver a lot. He's this fun, like I would almost call him like a Tony Pollard type mold, almost like a juiced up like Nyheim Hines, where he's a receiving weapon, and that fits really well on this offense because for a team that has a rushing quarterback, I know that it's not even a narrative, it's a pretty known fact at this point. I know JJ Zachariason has done a ton of work on it, that running backs that go to mobile quarterback teams, they don't see as many targets as running backs who don't. So a lot of the times, Josh Allen's not going to be like checking down or anything, and he's going to be looking to scramble, which is somewhat true, but the Bills look to pass to their running backs a lot. Even Devin Singletary, who was kind of like a part-time player last year, he ran the 4th most routes of any running back last year with 378. And I wouldn't even say that Devin Singletary's strong suit is even receiving. He is more of a between the tackles banger, make people miss, wiggle, kind of, juke people out in a phone booth. That's kind of Devin Singletary's thing, like sort of juke 3 guys out in a cloud of dust and get like 3 yards. He's not good at receiving, yet they still ran him out in routes because they just didn't have a better option. He was outside the top 50 in receiving grade on PFF, outside the top 15 yards per out run. But when we look at James Cook, I think this is why they took him. It was partly because they wanted to get McKissick. McKissick didn't end up signing with them. So they go with James Cook, who profiles as a much better receiving back. And I think he's going to get a really big chunk, if not all of those routes that Devin Singletary had last year. And he fits that role much better. He had the 5th best receiving grade per PFF last year in this class, ahead of Isaiah Spiller and Breece Hall, guys who were like our pre-draft like 1 and 2s, higher than Kenneth Walker. And this tweet's really good as well. He earns targets at a really well rate, or at a really good rate. I don't know, that sounded weird, but 20.1% targets per route run. So on 1 out of every 5 of his routes, he's getting a target. So if you do some quick math on that, I'm not saying that 20% is going to translate, but 20% of like 378 is like what? It's got to be somewhere in the range of like 70, 80 targets. Now, I don't think that that's what he's going to see, but I think 50, 60, 70 targets is like, it's doable. I think Michael Carter on the Jets last year had like 55 targets. So it's doable for sure. And he goes to a really good spot where he's on the Bills. They're going to be a very efficient, high-volume offense. You look at James Cook on the bottom here, yards per out run. He had the best yards per out run as well, 1.98. These are college running backs from 2018 to 2021. He had the best target per route run rate and the best yards per out run. Really, really strong stuff from James Cook. He is a very efficient, good receiving threat in the NFL. He goes to the Buffalo Bills, who since 2018 have been 3rd in neutral game passing rate, so how often they're passing in non-garbage time situations. And they're going to pass a ton. They're going to score a ton. And I imagine that James Cook can kind of be the role I see for him, like in terms of maybe like his upper tier outcome, is kind of like a young Austin Eckler, where remember when Austin Eckler was with Melvin Gordon, but he was still super efficient, could get like 10 to 12 touches a game and still turn that into like high-end RB2 production. I think that's what we're going to see from James Cook. I think that he can be anywhere. I think off the bat, he'll be in that like 8 to 12 touches per game. He's going to be very efficient on those touches. A lot of them are going to be through the air. And then I think that if he does kind of like blossom into a better running back, you're talking about maybe like 10 to 15 touches per game, uber efficient, in the mold of an Austin Eckler. Again, I don't think he'll ever be a bell cow. I don't think he'll ever be like a top 12 dynasty running back asset, but I do think that he is going to be a fun option for the Bills and probably return fantasy points as early as year 1. Now, our next running back in this tier, again, I want to make this clear about these tiers. If you, between each tiers, I feel very strongly about each tier, separating each running back. But if you want to, in your own rankings, if you want to swap, running backs and have, this next running back we're going to talk about actually is Rachaad White. And if you want to put him at RB3, I have no argument against that. I actually myself want to put him RB3. I have James Cook and Rachaad White back to back in the rookie rankings. Like literally, one of them is like, I think one of them is like 203. The next one's like 204. I like both of these guys a lot. Now, when we talk about Rachaad White, he goes to the Buccaneers in the 3rd round instead of the 2nd round. He comes out, even with day 2 draft capital, he comes out as a bronze in my model. Now, I'm actually overriding it, and in these rankings, I'm pretty much treating him as a silver because his college profile is very weird, where it's very tough to communicate through numbers the kind of career that he had, because he goes to JUCO for like, I want to say 1 or 2 years. He transfers to Arizona State. First year where he's like a meaningful starter on Arizona State, it's a COVID year where the Pac-12 plays like 4 games. So that year doesn't even count in my model. You need to play at least 6 games for your season to count. So it only counts his like senior season where he dominated, but 1 year of dominant production and 3rd round draft capital isn't enough in the model. It's close, but it's not enough. So I'm treating him as like a silver in my head. And I think he has some of the highest upside in the entire class. We did a top 5 running back video a while back where I went through kind of my model, and his comps come out really well. He has like Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones. There was a 3rd one that was pretty sweet as well. But he has some really sweet comps in that bronze area, even with a bad profile, just because of the receiving upside is so crazy. Now, when we look at his receiving profile, he looks wild. This is my running backs these are all day 2 running backs filtered by their peak season and receiving yard market share. So his highest ever receiving yard market share season, 18.02%. That's really, really good. He is right in this range where, you have the guys at the top like Ty Montgomery, who played like wide receiver in college, Dree Archer, Dexter McCluster. I think they also played a little bit wide receiver, but from a pure running back standpoint, he is up there. I highlighted the names, but he's up there with David Johnson, Antonio Gibson, Dalvin Cook, DeMarco Murray, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Matt Forte as a receiving option. I think those are some really strong like ceiling comps for him. I don't think that it's out of the question that he could be like a David Johnson, Alvin Kamara type guy in the NFL. Now, those are 99th percentile ceiling outcomes, but he has insane upside because when you talk about his receiving works skill set, he has it all. And then when you talk about upside, we're talking about, in terms of running backs, when we talk about upside, we are talking about receiving ability, and then also athleticism. And he is really athletic. He has elite grades per RAS in explosion and speed. He has good size at 6 foot, 214 pounds. He's pretty much got everything you want for a home run type swing on a running back prospect. Now he goes to Tampa Bay, who it's not a perfect spot, but it's a really good spot for an archetype like this. And it kind of reminds me a little bit. It does give me some vibes of like Kamara going to the Saints, where they already had like Mark Ingram and Adrian Peterson there. You just want a guy who is going to go to a system that's going to score a ton, like you have with the Buccaneers. And then also it's a spot where, you know, he can kind of find his role as that receiving back, James White type guy for the Buccaneers. And then should anything happen to Leonard Fournette, it is absolute wheels up for Rachaad White. Now, he's going to be competing for those change of pace touches with like Keyshawn Vaughn. I'm really not too concerned about that. And when we talk about Fournette, it's a little bit tough because Fournette signed a 3-year deal. I think they don't have an out until not after this season, but the next season. So after the 2023 season. So he's going to be there for pretty much the long term. But what we've seen with Fournette is like he's never stayed healthy. He missed 3 games last year, 4 games before that. He was relatively healthy that year before that. Then the year before, so we're talking like, I think this is like his second year now. He missed like 8 games. Before that, he played like a full season. But then in college, he was getting hurt all the time. He is a pretty good bet to miss like 3 to 4 games, which in his absence, Rachaad White will come in there and be instantly like a top 12 running back if he does, you know, beat out Keyshawn Vaughn for that running back 2 spot. So a ton of upside. He has that like Kamara, David Johnson type skill set. It really just comes down to, you know, he's a little bit more red flags in terms of his college production than those guys. But again, I think that is partly just because of his weird like JUCO COVID year type number. So he's a guy I love. If you want to have him as high as RB3, you can go ahead and do that. Now, this is where it gets even, geez, dude, this running back class is just disgusting. We go down here to C tier, and this is where we're going to have Isaiah Spiller. Isaiah Spiller, didn't mean to do that. Isaiah Spiller, RB5. He goes 4th round, 123rd overall to the Chargers, and Isaiah Spiller definitely fell down my rankings. He was pretty firmly my RB3 going into the draft. He now falls down to RB5, and he has some legit concerns. You know, a guy who was supposed to be like a top 2 running back in this class, was supposed to be like a 2nd round pick in draft capital. He falls to day 3, which is a really big red flag. He also has efficiency concerns. I know that Noah Hills, he's on BDGE's channel, and his efficiency was really bad. So there's a lot of red flags with the profile. But Isaiah Spiller is the last silver running back in our database. I have him behind Rachaad White. I'm putting Rachaad White ahead of him. I have him in a full tier behind Rachaad White. But this is as low as I can do for him because he is a really strong prospect for a day 3 running back, right? For a day 3 running back, he is pretty much all you could hope for. He hits my thresholds across the board for rushing market share, receiving yard market share, adjusted yards for team pass, or adjusted yards for team play. Across the board, he hits all of my thresholds. He was a mega producer in college. 21-year-old early declare, which is really strong as well. The only knocks, again, efficiency, day 3 draft capital, and his 4.6 speed. But, again, despite all this, the production wins out, and he still ends up as a silver running back who hit top 12 seasons at a 25% clip, which is really strong. But when you consider that the rest of these running backs are bronzes, and bronzes hit top 12 seasons at like a 5% rate. Now, the impressive part with Isaiah Spiller is that he is one of only 8 running backs since 2007 to be a silver running back prospect, but also get picked on day 3. So these are guys who, despite their draft capital, still shine through. And it's a pretty strong list. I mean, you have Jordan Howard, you have Jay Ajayi, Devontae Freeman, Lamar Miller. After that, pretty much falls off. Now, I ordered these guys by their 40-yard dash time. Isaiah Spiller is the slowest of the bunch, which isn't great. And if you want to talk about guys that kind of fit into his area of relative athletic score, RAS, you are talking about Kenneth Gainwell, Jordan Howard, Devonta Freeman, Jacquizz Rodgers. I think that Jordan Howard is kind of a decent comp for him. And I think that when you look at this list of running backs and you consider that Isaiah Spiller is going at like the 2-3 turn in rookie drafts, that's not a fine swing at all. I also don't hate the landing spot. He goes to the Chargers, and this is going to be a high-scoring offense tied to Justin Herbert for the foreseeable future. And we've seen spots last year where I think Justin Jackson was like a league winner. I remember Pete Overs, I could be talking my ass here, but I do believe that Pete Overs had Justin Jackson. No, I could be wrong. I want to say that might have been Jacob Sanderson, but Justin Jackson in like the fantasy playoffs was a league winner when Austin Eckler went down. Austin Eckler has never been a workhorse. He has never hit 1,000 rushing yards. He is never going to be a guy who demands like 20 plus touches and there's no room for everyone else. he's also a guy who has like missed some time here and there. We've seen Justin Jackson, Josh Kelly, even like Larry Roundtree kind of mix in here and there. Isaiah Spiller is going to have every opportunity to mix in. There are, outside of Austin Eckler, there were more than 100 carries going to other running backs. There were over 30 targets going to other running backs. Austin Eckler's 27. He could be, he get into that age where he could decline. He could get hurt. So you're talking about Isaiah Spiller where he's going to have pretty much every opportunity to shine, where they're going to sort of, last year when it was like week 1, Larry Roundtree was the backup, and then Justin Jackson was the backup. Joshua Kelly really never flashed, but they were sort of rotating in those backup running backs trying to get a true number 2. And I think that Isaiah Spiller profiles a little bit better as a bigger back that can sort of go between the tackles a little bit better than somebody like a Justin Jackson. So he's going to have every opportunity. He looks good on paper. It's a fun landing spot. So I'm a fan. I don't mind Isaiah Spiller. I think he's going to get pushed down really far in your rookie drafts. If you can get him in like the late second, I'm pretty much into it. Now, this is going to be pretty much if you guys watched yesterday, I had a George Pickens, Chris Olave pretty much rant because I don't feel the same way other people do about Olave versus Pickens. This is that debate right here, which is, I guess, Isaiah Spiller versus Dameon Pierce. But here's the thing. I have Dameon Pierce as my RB6, but the Dameon Pierce love that I see on the timeline and I see on YouTube, I've seen people say like Dameon Pierce should be a late first round rookie pick. I've seen that from 2 reputable analysts now. It's blasphemy. We are pretty much doing the same thing we did with Trey Sermon, the same thing we did with like Michael Carter, the same thing we did with Keyshawn Vaughn with Dameon Pierce. We are falling in love with a bad profile on a juicy landing spot, and that, or not even a juicy landing spot, just an empty depth chart and sort of running with it. And I kind of want to talk about why I'm lower on Dameon Pierce. First of all, he's a bronze prospect. He's not good, even though he has day 2 draft capital, which is huge for running backs. The biggest narrative on Dameon Pierce is screw your numbers. Mullen was awful at Florida. He didn't use players the correct way. Just trust the tape when it comes to Dameon Pierce. And the problem is that I have tape factors in my model. I have film grades that I use. I know he didn't go day 2. I don't know why I said day 2 earlier. He went day 3. But I have, in the model, I have inputs that are from tape. And the first one is Lance Zierlein, who is NFL Draft Media's pro scout. He is really good at what he does. He unearthed guys like Alvin Kamara, Dalvin. He had like a top 5 type grade on Dalvin Cook, even though he went second round. He had Jordan Howard as like he gave Jordan Howard a first round grade, even though that Jordan Howard was like a 5th round pick in the NFL. He is really good at what he does. His strongest grading is on running backs. He's very good at grading running backs. So when you look at Dameon Pierce, you look at his Lance Zierlein grade, and you hear how good he looks on tape, it should be a lot better than it is. And it's really not that good. He graded out as the RB6 in this class, and he has a 6.19 grade, which puts him in the tier of 6.1 to 6.19 is a tier that is labeled good backup with potential to develop into a starter. It doesn't sound like somebody who really pops off tape to me and looks like undeniable on tape. He was also a 4th round pick. So the NFL, my other film input is Lance Zierlein grade and then NFL draft capital. The NFL draft, or the NFL, scouting complex viewed him as a day 3 pick. It's tough to say that he is that elite talent on film that a lot of people are sort of claiming here. It's not. I can't stress enough that the tape that people are watching isn't what is showing up in terms of the numbers. Now, I think that a lot of people are also really overestimating or are really underestimating the difference from round 3 to round 4 draft capital. A lot of people think that like the difference between Rachaad White going round 3 and Dameon Pierce going round 4 isn't that big. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that the Dynasty community makes, that like, okay, well, round 1 to round 2 isn't that big, round 2 to round 3 isn't that big, round 3 to round 4 isn't that big. It's that round 4 to round 5 drop off. I always hear that like round 4 isn't that bad, and it's kind of viewed as almost like a day 2 pick, but I think that's super misguided. I did the research this offseason for these RS grades where you look at this here. I tracked every running back since 2007 to 2019. Every running back that has played 3 or more seasons in the NFL. I tracked their points per game through their first 3 seasons by round. First rounders have a 13 point per game through their first 3 seasons. Round 2, 9.39. Round 3, 9.11. So very close. Day 2 is really what matters for running backs. From day 2, right from that round 3 to round 4, there is a massive drop off. Round 4, 5.58 points per game. Almost half of what you're getting on day 2. Round 5, 5.53 points per game. Really not even a difference from round 4. So round 4 is much closer to round 5 than it is to round 3, and it's not even close. Round 4 draft capital might as well be round 5 draft capital. Then you see another drop off from round 6 and round 7 at around like 3 points per game. So to say that like round 4 isn't that far off from round 3, in your head, you might as well treat round 4 draft capital as round 5 draft capital instead of, sort of treating it as like round 3 draft capital plus, because it's not. It is a much more negative indicator than third round draft capital when a running back goes in the 4th round. You get paid less. Day 3 is just, the whole day passes. These are just guys that people are taking, or teams are taking flyers on, and they have no long-term, ties to those players. So to say like, oh, but he still got round 4 draft capital, it's not that bad. It is pretty bad. Day 3 is day 3. Now, the next argument that I hear is, well, if Lance Zierlein in the NFL draft media doesn't, or NFL scouting complex doesn't think that he looks good on tape, yards created does. I know you love yards created. I keep on hearing him getting yards created, getting like cited as like Dameon Pierce and why he looks good. And even Graham Barfield says it, the creator of yards created. His yards created wasn't good. He had a 4.53 yards created per attempt, which is the input in my model. Anybody that has over I believe it's like 5.53 gets a big multiplier in my model. That's what Kenneth Walker hit. At least Kenneth Walker, he shined. He had a 92nd percentile yards created. He actually looked good in that category. Dameon Pierce had a 43rd percentile yards created. Like he wasn't even average at yards created. So I don't understand. I don't understand the takes here that like he looks great on tape and his yards created is solid. It's really not. His yards created isn't special. His Lance Zierlein grade isn't special. His draft capital was day 3. I have a really hard time seeing, like, I try and quantify all the, because I don't watch tape. I can't. I could go out there and watch, like, I could watch Deuce Vaughn, and Deuce Vaughn at Kansas State is one of the sickest running backs ever. He's like this 5'6" guy, is like Darren Sproles, a really, really fun guy, and I could watch his highlights and be like, this guy is sick. But I can't sit there and watch a guy and say, these traits will transfer to the NFL. That's not a skill that I have, so I defer to others. I look at film grade from Lance Zierlein. I look at NFL draft capital and yards created. He was average to below average in all of those. He didn't pop in any single one of them. So I have a hard time with the people that are pushing up Dameon Pierce because he looks great on tape. I don't see it. From the number standpoint, I don't see it. Now, when we get past that, his production profile sucks. It's really bad. He never saw more than 28% of Florida's carries at any point in time. It's rough. I don't understand how people kind of think that he is going to be, the RB1 for Houston from day one. I know that he goes to a relatively empty depth chart. People are just saying, okay, he's going to be pretty much the RB1 in the mix there from day one. If he couldn't beat Michael P. Ryan out for RB1 duties at Florida, I have a tough time believing that he's going to beat out Marlon Mack, who I'm actually a really big fan of now. He was really good through like 3-4 years. He's solid. He's coming off, I think he's like year 2 now removed from that Achilles injury. You also have Rex Burkhead, who will just never go away. I know that Rex Burkhead is silly to say, but he will never go away. He will always have, his splash weeks and be involved in the passing game. And there's still a chance that they could bring in like a free agent or do something stupid like the Texans do where they trade for somebody. Like they traded for David Johnson a few years back. They could do something wild like that. So I think it is pretty fragile. I think it's also pretty funny to sort of expect him to be the day one bell cow when he's never been a bell cow during his entire collegiate career. So it's tough. I actually think that after I wrote this blurb up for Dameon Pierce, I think that Marlon Mack's actually a great buy now. Now, with all that being said, after that entire rant, I have Dameon Pierce as my RB6, so that's not bad. That's about where market probably has him. I want to say that most of the market's going to have him at like RB5 at the worst probably. I just disagree with his price. I don't understand the buzz that he should be going late first that I've seen from some analysts, like even early second. I've seen him go 202 in a rookie draft of mine. I can't get there. I have him personally as like my 212. If you want to take him like the back half of the second, go for it. But anything else I think is a wild misuse of your draft cap. If you're going to take Dameon Pierce at the 202, trade your 202 to the Marlon Mack owner and go grab like a 2023 second. If you could do like 2023 second plus Marlon Mack, go trade that 202 away. Save yourself the trouble of that. There's just no way. I mean, maybe he gives you like fringe RB2 production in year 1 and then past that it's done. I don't know, man. If you want to have a near-term play at running back that you can just flip later for profit, just take Ty Davis Price later. I just don't really see the I don't see how he has more upside than a Ty Davis Price where you kind of need maybe not even an injury, just things to break right for him to be a guy that you can even make a profit on because you're buying him at like an early second. I don't think that in season you'll ever be able to say like, yeah, I'll be able to sell him for a 2023 first. No shot. No shot. Maybe a 2023 second, but at that point you could just trade the 202 for that. Now moving on from there, we have Ty Davis Price, who is going to be in the same tier. I have him as my RB7. And I'm really coming around on Ty Davis Price. He wasn't really even on my radar before the draft, but he gets round 3 draft capital and goes to the 49ers. So that's really fun because we now have a player that is pretty much like almost exactly like Trey Sermon in that he was just a round 3 running back that Kyle Shanahan laid his eyes on, liked, except you're not paying the price of Trey Sermon. Trey Sermon, I didn't get him anywhere last year. People were drafting him like the late first, were just falling over themselves for him. Whereas Ty Davis Price, you're getting him at like early to mid 3rd round rookie price, which is really solid for a guy who goes to this Kyle Shanahan system, which has always produced running backs, and it's always been a meritocracy where the best running back wins out. I kind of like him. He's 6 foot, 219 pounds. He has fine size. He has great speed for his size, 4.48, 90th percentile speed score. And we're talking about bronzes here. So there's not really a point in talking about like production and all that. You're really just talking about draft capital, potential role in terms of are they a between the tackles guy? Are they all purpose? Can they catch and run between the tackles? Are they just a receiving back? With Ty Davis Price, you're looking at a sort of a between the tackles guy with some juice. And that's really fun in Kyle Shanahan's offense, right? He's going to be kind of that inside zone scheme type guy where if Elijah Mitchell gets hurt, where he got hurt last year, I mean, Shanahan loves to run these running backs into the ground where he will just run them until they get hurt. He did that with Mitchell. He did that with Raheem Mostert. And Mitchell's more of like the outside zone guy. Ty Davis Price can kind of be that inside banger. And if Mitchell gets hurt, you're looking at, like, it wouldn't shock me at all if Price comes in there and just rips off like 6 like top 15 running back point per game numbers. Like, I think Jeff Wilson did it not last season, but the year before that, where like the last like 5 or 6 games, Jeff Wilson went on an absolute tear. It wouldn't be very hard to see that with Ty Davis Price. So that's why I'm into him. I think that it's very easy where if Mitchell does go down, he's an undersized back. Shanahan loves to run his running backs into the dirt. You get 1 or 2 games for him to pop off. You can turn a mid-third in 2022 into like a 2023 mid-second pretty easily. Now, our last running back in this tier, RB8, is Brian Robinson. And I don't love his profile at all. When it comes to Brian Robinson, we're just pretty much talking about the last running back left here that went on day 2. He went 3rd round to the Washington football team, or the Washington Commanders. It's not a great spot, right? Because he doesn't really have a clear, he's not going to take somebody's job. He's not going to supplant like Antonio Gibson as a between the tackles guy. He's not going to supplant McKissick as the passing down guy. You are pretty much looking at a guy with round 3 draft capital that has size and is a upside handcuff play. He's 224 pounds, 6'2". He's a big dude, but that's about it. His comp on player profile is Gus Edwards, which I think is a fair comp. I should have had this up earlier, but it's a fair comp. It's not really something I'm shooting for, but I do think like the early 3rd, it's a fine swing because if Antonio Gibson does go down or something, he can come in there and give you some meaningful upside pretty immediately. But that's really all I can say about him. Not a huge fan of him. He's super old. He's like 23, never really popped to Alabama until literally everybody left the running back room, and then he popped to this year. Just not a great prospect, but again, day 2 draft capital is really all we can point to at this point. Now, in D tier, our first running back here is going to be Tyler Algier, RB9 in D tier. And I know that I don't think I'm going to end up with a ton of Tyler Algier because I know a lot of you guys are going to push him up into that late 2nd range, but he's really fun. He goes day 3, so he goes like 5th round. But again, 5th round isn't really 5th round sounds bad, but like the difference between 4th round and 5th round isn't that bad. So he goes 5th round. He's big, 5'11", 220 pounds. He's a thick boy, and he can catch passes. So he's a really nice skill set as a guy that could seize a role almost immediately. And his only issue from an upside perspective is he's not very athletic. He runs like a 4.6. He kind of looks like Zach Moss according to player profile, which isn't a terrible comp for him. But his landing spot is pretty much his biggest plus at this point, that he's this all-purpose running back, and he goes to a depth chart on the Falcons that pretty much just has Cordell Patterson, who's probably going to play a little bit of a hybrid between running back and wide receiver, and then he's competing with Damian Williams and Quadri Olison. So if he's talented, he's going to get touches. I think that he sort of feels a lot like this year's, like Ramondre Stevenson, Khalil Herbert, or I think that he is going to sort of have some flashes, and then we could see like 3, 4, 5 games where he comes in there and averages like RB2 point per game type numbers. It's not super hard to see. Again, though, I don't think I'm going to have any of him. I have him as an early 3rd. I think he's going to go, mid to late 2nds in most drafts. Now, our last running back here, our RB10, is Zamir White. He went 4th round, 122nd overall to the Las Vegas Raiders. With Zamir White, his profile looks good, not because his production is anything crazy, but he's a really good athlete, right? So he's 6 foot, 214 pounds, 4.4 speed, great speed score, all of that good stuff. And then he also went to Georgia. So he played against SEC competition. That's a big thing as well. That's pretty much all you really get with him. So he has the best RS grade among all bronzes, which isn't a huge plus, but it is something. And then he also was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. He has that going for him. I think he also has like ACL tear, like injury type issues. So that's a little bit tough. He's also never been efficient. He's also never been a great pass catcher. You're pretty much just looking at a guy who has NFL size, NFL speed, and goes to a landing spot in the Raiders where you're pretty much drafting handcuffs at this point. But if Josh Jacobs goes down, he would be the between the tackles guy pretty much instantly. And that's a pretty valuable role when last year we had Josh Jacobs go down. We thought Kenyon Drake was going to be the between the tackles guy, but it ended up being ended up being Peyton Barber, who like kind of gave us like usable fantasy weeks. Zamir White could be that next year. The Raiders also didn't pick up Josh Jacobs' 5th-year option, so next year Zamir White has a pathway to be the RB1, though I do expect him to probably bring somebody else in by that point in time. But he is a fun upside swing. I also realized I didn't put him in D tier, but he's a fun upside swing. He has size, he has speed. Should somebody go down, he would be a great fill-in at that point. That's pretty much what you're looking at. At D tier and beyond, you're looking at guys where if the starter goes down, they need to be the immediate guy in line that can be next year's like Khalil Herbert. I'm trying to think of the other guys in that range, but I think Khalil Herbert is pretty much the best name I can think of off the top of my head. Now, that's going to do it for us today. This is the tier list here in all of her glory. As always, if you want access to my entire running back rankings, my entire wide receiver rankings, my dynasty rankings, all of that good stuff, it is all on patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I just dropped my top 50 Dynasty Superflex tight end premium rankings on there. So if you need, you're like a top, I know a lot of us have like 4-round rookie drafts. If you need 4+ rounds of rookie draft rankings, that is all on the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. And I know I keep saying this, and I know I keep pushing this out, but we're going to have an update on Patreon that puts the $5 tier up to like $8 and then some other tiers in between. Everybody that joins for $5 between now and Sunday when I make that update are going to be grandfathered in at a $5 rate until the end of time when you stop subscribing. So if you want to get in for a discounted price and you want to, you plan on using my seasonal rankings and you plan on using my dynasty rankings, all that good stuff in the future, now is the time to get in. As always, I love you guys. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like. This ended up being, 45 minutes, but this is a deep dive on my top 10 running backs. As always, I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one.
I got the juice, I got the juice. Channel, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper song, singer, suspended, subpoena from Mr. Me.